back to the GOAT Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm your host, Jim Neander. So I hope you all are doing great out there, staying safe, feeling good. I'm great. We're all great here. Getting ready for the football season. You know, the NFL schedule has been released. It looks like sports are getting ready to gear up here. They're trying to figure out what they're going to do. But I feel optimistic about the NFL season going off as planned and hopefully getting a full slate of games in there. That's what I'm planning for. So we're going to cross our fingers and hope that's the way it goes. For now, we do have a schedule, so a lot of interesting things to go over there. We'll have an episode coming up featuring our schedule trends and teams that we love as far as their schedule for fantasy football and some teams that we're pretty down on. We're going to get into that again probably next week or so. So keep an eye out for that if you're looking for some schedule tips. I like to get started. I like to get my season off to a fast start. I try to draft guys that have a nice first 3 to 5 week schedule. Worry about other things later on. Injuries happen with all the bye weeks, and that's always been my strategy, but we're going to dig into that a little bit deeper in those episodes. So, we've got a great episode for you today. We just recently finished all of our episodes, diving into the AFC teams and the AFC divisions, going through our projections and just kind of talking about what our expectations are for those teams offensively and as their relevance pertains to fantasy football. So if you didn't catch those episodes, make sure you grab those. We had a bunch of great guests on helping us dive into that. And we have the same guests actually going to be helping us out with our NFC divisions. So we're going to be starting with the NFC West today, and we brought back our buddy Jeff Hussain. One thing I do want to mention is at the time of taping earlier, we didn't know that the Seahawks were making an offer to Devontae Freeman, and even though they didn't sign him, it looks like they are going to look for a veteran running back to have behind Chris Carson. Rashad Penny possibly not going to be ready for the beginning of the season, and depending on who that signing is, it absolutely could impact Chris Carson's projections. Rankings and projections are living, breathing, mutating beings, and they're going to move, all day, every day. So anytime you hear news like that, you got to think about it. Of course, Chris Carson would take just a slight hit if they were to sign someone the caliber and the quality of a Devontae Freeman. So we'll see what happens. It hasn't happened yet, but so we're going to go ahead and get to this episode, the NFC West with Jeff Hussain, and here we go. All right, and here we are with Jeff Hussain. Jeff, welcome back into the show. Thanks for joining us again. How's it going?
Going great. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, man. Yeah, so, all right, we're up to the NFC teams now. I know you helped us out with the AFC West. We're going to keep you on the West Coast here as we move over to the NFC. And, of course, in the NFC West, we're going to start with the San Francisco 49ers, defending NFC champions. And they were a good fantasy team last year. They were second in points scored, almost 30 points a game, 13th in the passing attack, and the second best rushing attack at 144 yards a game. Only a mere 60 yards behind Baltimore, the number one rushing attack. But that's pretty crazy. 144 yards a game is a great year. So we've got a pretty interesting team here. They made some draft moves. They drafted Brandon Ayuk as their big move here in the offense to be their wide receiver 2, we assume. They allowed Matt Breida to leave and go to Miami. So hopefully adding a little more clarity to that backfield, situation that was such a headache to, kind of traverse last year. So let's talk about Jimmy G first. Jimmy G had a decent year last year. He wasn't great. He wasn't bad, but he led a very good team to a very good record. He was the number 14 quarterback last year. But without adding significant weapons this year, do you think that Jimmy G can take that step up into a solid QB1? Or is he still destined to be a streamable quarterback, at best this year?
I definitely think he has what it takes to be a QB1. His stats last year were almost 4,000 yards passing with 27 touchdowns, only 13 interceptions. I think that he can improve on those numbers. I think San Francisco's a team that is going to be just as good as they were last year. I'm a big fan of Kyle Shanahan and the offense that he runs. He's a really good knack of putting his players in the best position to perform. It did it with Atlanta. He's doing it now in San Francisco, took his team to the Super Bowl. I think Jimmy is going to be increasing his numbers over 4,000 yards, possibly 30 touchdowns. If he keeps his interception down, he's definitely on target to reach those numbers.
Yeah, I like the way you put it there. I do think, Kyle Shanahan offenses and his players just succeed, right? He finds a way to make his system succeed, and the players that he puts in it finds a way to get them to succeed. So, I agree with you there. I think this is an offense that you want a piece of. Jimmy G, I think, is going to be, still not draftable for me personally, because I think it's a really solid, rushing team, as we saw with the second best, rushing attack. And I just think they're going to keep the focus there, and that just limits his ceiling. But I do think he's going to be very good, and could be a great value with where you're going to be able to get him this year. I think the
We
bigger,
also have the caveat that we're the type of players that don't take quarterbacks early.
yeah, absolutely, yeah, and that'll, we'll see that as a trend here. A lot of the people that are going to be watching me do a lot of these shows will know that I'm almost never going to draft a quarterback in the first half of a draft, let alone the first number of rounds. But yeah, I live in the Jimmy G world when I'm playing throughout the year. I'm picking these guys up week to week on the matchups. So, he's definitely going to be somebody, if he's not drafted, that he'll get his work from me. That's for sure. Let's talk about the backfield here. Was obviously, a headache last year, even though it was a great backfield overall. The split was, hard to, really kind of predict from week to week and who to play, who's going to have a big game. So Matt Breida is now out of that equation, but still a pretty full running back room here. So we got Raheem Mostert, Tevin Coleman, Jerick McKinnon possibly coming back, from injury here. You still have Jeff Wilson Jr. back there, and Kyle Juszczyk will, just take just a little bit off the top there, just a little bit, to further annoy you if you have a San Francisco running back. So it seems like most people feel that Mostert has been elevated to the number one. He played a lot better as far as his efficiency. His yards per carry were much higher than Tevin Coleman's were. And most people assume he's the number one running back. Do you think Mostert's the clear number one here, or do you still think that Coleman's going to get enough work to be called a 1B?
I think that both of these guys are going to get every opportunity. Now, Coleman came over, or at least the following year, followed Kyle Shanahan to San Francisco. So Kyle is a fan of Coleman, and that was the only thing that I think that would hinder Mostert from acquiring the job outright. Is if you go back and you look at the Falcons. They ran with kind of a running back by committee between Coleman and Freeman, right? Devontae Freeman.
Yep.
But they both were productive. That's the most important thing. I think you're going to be able to get plenty of production from both Mostert and either McKinnon, Wilson, or who am I losing it here? Coleman.
Yeah, I mean, Coleman.
Mostert's going to be the 1A, and Coleman will be the 1B type of situation. I'm anxious to see how this plays out in training camp, who ends up winning the job. My money right now is on Mostert, with Coleman coming in to spell him. But we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, if Mostert was the number two running back on your team as you leave your draft night, are you pretty concerned about that, or you feel pretty good about that?
I'm concerned.
Yeah, me too.
I'm really concerned because I don't know what I'm going to get out of him. He could run Kyle Shanahan could totally mess us up and roll with Coleman or McKinnon. We don't know. We'll know obviously after training camp. But yeah, he's not a top 24 running back for me right now.
Yeah, right now he's being drafted as the number 27 and rising as people assume he's going to take over the number one role. And that would be my biggest concern also. It's just, if it all depends on my roster construction at that point, as always. But I feel I'd be pretty concerned if he was my number two RB coming out of the draft. And I couldn't, Coleman might be worth a very late draft pick. All depends on how far he falls. But I think he's the clear number two for me. And I just don't know where I value the number one in San Francisco right now if it is Mostert. I'm not sure if I'm ready to put a number two running back for San Fran on my team right now. So it's a tricky situation here. We'll have to monitor that as the preseason goes on. You always got to hear coach speak, right? You like to hear what they're saying throughout the offseason, who's taking the lead, and it all depends on what kind of an offseason we have. So we'll see what happens there. Let's move out wide here. All right, Deebo Samuel was the big story in San Fran last year. He was their top receiver, finishing as the number 29 receiver in the league on only 57 receptions, 800 yards, and 3 touchdowns. So, there was kind of a big gap there as you get to those back-end wide receiver twos. He is the presumptive number one on a team where you feel like Jimmy G is going to have some improvement this year. So where does Debo rank for you? Is he a mid-tier wide receiver two with big upside, or do you think he still has to be in that back-end wide receiver two, wide receiver three conversation?
He's a wide receiver two with big upside. You're going to see a situation where more targets are going to go around. They're going to throw the ball more. I personally believe that we're going to see. They added, what's his name? Brandon Ayuk, right? Now he's out of Arizona State. Big, tall wide receiver. He's going to obviously garner both targets and attention. And of course, they still have Dante Pettis, who I was a huge fan of going into last year. But Debo emerged, right?
Yeah.
Debo emerged and ruined that for me. So, but I'm still on the. I'm not gonna jump off the Dante Pettis wagon just yet.
Yeah.
He got hurt, so we will see. They've got a lot more talent to go around. That's why I think that Jimmy G is able to increase his numbers, while at the same time some of these guys remain similar to last year.
Yeah, I mean, I like to see a little more proven talent, but you're right, there's talent there. So as we look beyond Debo, we start to see the battle for the number two here, and that's a bigger question is, you have Kendrick Bourne, who only had 30 receptions last year. Not a bad year, but obviously, difficult to see him really taking a stronghold on the number two right away. You have Jalen Hurd, who was, pretty well, was a pretty big prospect coming out and missed the season with injury, but he appears to be healthy. And then, of course, as you mentioned, we have Brandon Ayuk. So not only is the question who's the number two, but is that, what value does the number two in San Fran have? Is that somebody that's going to be a flex or a wide receiver three, or do you think that's a streamable, whoever it is, do you think it's more of a streamable position?
It's more of a flex position. You're going to find that there's going to be a lot of targets, a lot of fantasy points. I believe I mentioned earlier, when I go into my draft, I usually pick all the teams and put them in a category of the teams that I think are going to have prolific offenses. And then I label all the guys in those offenses. And I find that San Francisco, as opposed to like the Jets, they're going to score more points. More points are going to be available. So players on this team are going to have more of a value because they're going to score more fantasy points. You're going to see your that come to fruition between Debo Samuel, Dante Pettis, Brandon Ayuk, or Jalen Hurd. I think that you're going to have a lot more fantasy points for them, and there's going to be a lot to go around.
Yeah, I mean, I like this offense. Again, I'm all Pettis. I don't even think he's going to be on the roster come the beginning of the season, but we'll have to see. There's been a lot of talk about him, and it feels like this is the third offseason where we're talking about Dante Pettis without anything to show for it. But
I know, right?
We'll see. And then, we're not going to talk too much about George Kittle. We know he's great. We know he's going to be a top tight end if he's healthy. The question only becomes, are you the kind of person that can draft a tight end in the back end of the second round, which is where you pretty much got to get Kelsey or Kittle? And do you think having that rock solid, weekly top five tight end is worth that draft capital?
Well, that depends on you as an individual. I've been playing fantasy football for 20 years. I generally wait to take tight ends because I plan to stream. I like to take as many running backs and wide receivers in the early rounds as I can. That gives me trade options as well as injury backups. Now, if you're of the mindset or a new player, I absolutely see nothing wrong with drafting this guy in the second round. He's totally worth it in the second round for you if you're the kind of individual that wants to focus more on flexing running backs, picking up running backs, and running that guy out there every week. It's a really safe move to have guys you can run out there in either quarterback or the tight end position every week. They're no-brainer starts. You run them out there, and then you just focus on your running backs and your wide receivers. Now, for me, I'm of the other mindset. I want to play the matchups because I want to maximize the potential I can get at that position. I would rather wait and draft some other running backs in the second round or wide receivers than the tight end, because I feel that I can do just as good of a job playing the matchups and getting almost as many tight end points as someone who has George Kittle.
Yeah,
I may not get as much, but I'm going to be right up there.
Yeah, it's the opportunity cost then who you're skipping in that second round, right? And then like as you said, if you make the right decisions with those streamers, you only forfeit a few points, hopefully most unless they have one of those monster games, but you have a solid game, and then that guy you drafted in the second round hopefully is a beast because that's what you should be drafting in the second round, right? Guys that are scoring 20 points, a game in most weeks. So yeah, I tend to not draft tight ends early. I did an experimental team last year with one of my cheaper buy-ins where I drafted Kelsey early, and I think I drafted Watson in the fourth round, and my team was atrocious. And it wasn't just those decisions. Obviously, there were a number of maybe bad decisions near the middle end of that draft. But again, it was really a lot of experimentation, picks that I know I normally would never make. That was the whole purpose of that league, to try to see what would happen. I'm usually too scared to do that in any leagues because I want to win, right? But this was like a last minute cheap kind of add-on league last year, and I was like, all right, let me mess around a little bit, for a few bucks. And last time I do that, that's it. I like my strategy. I'm a playoff team every year, man. So all right,
I hear you. I'm the same way. Now, we don't want anyone to think that if you do draft him early, that's necessarily a bad thing. It's not.
No, not at all. If you make the right picks in the later rounds and you get starters in that 6th, 7th, 8th round, then you've already made back up that opportunity cost if you make the right pick. So yeah, it's just about odds. It's a position where you only play one person as opposed to 2 or 3 every week. So I just like to have more depth at the positions where I'm playing 2 or 3 guys a week instead of just one player. Same thing with quarterback, right? I mean, that's the same way I look at it. So
yep, exactly.
All right, let's move on in the division here. We're going to go to Seattle. First, I just want to say before we finish with fantasy, I think this is the best division in football. I don't know. Do you think I'm right there?
I agree. They have, what do we got? We now have 4. Every quarterback in this division is solid.
Yep.
Solid. So they're all close to 4,000 yards passing with over 20 touchdowns. So yeah, this is the best division in football.
Yeah, I think I'm going to be watching more 405 games with intent, than I probably have in a couple of years. A lot of great afternoon games this year. I'm looking forward to it. So, all right, Seattle was a better offense than we thought for fantasy this last year. 9th in points, 25 points a game, right in the middle of the pack in the passing attack, 14th, and the 4th best rushing attack in the league. So overall, there was a lot of people to play in Seattle throughout the year. Some we knew, some were, a little more surprising. Wilson had another great season, the number 4 quarterback in the league. It's hard to say, that Russell Wilson's not the best quarterback playing football. Not for fantasy, just playing. I know Mahomes and Jackson are amazing, and there's nothing to take away from them. But every time I watch Russell Wilson play, I'm just amazed at what he can do with the football, the decisions he makes, the throws he makes, really are just astounding to me. If they were to load up this team, this offensive line, and these skill players, he could be, on another level, I think. That being said, I do think he's going to be a top-flight quarterback. I don't know if he'll be in the top 5. I think I'll probably have him projected in the number 7-6 range personally, but that's not a bad thing. So, let's start with Russell Wilson there. Do you think he's a top 5 quarterback? Do you think he's a quarterback 1? Or do you think the volume will go back down enough that you got to think about this a little bit more?
Well, reports this offseason have come out saying that Russell Wilson wants to throw the ball more. He's anxious to get more of a passing attack going. Now, there's rumors that Seattle signed Marshawn Lynch, so we'll see what that does. But yeah, I can look, Russell Wilson's going to be top 12, number 1 quarterback. And with all the new guys, you're going to be able to get Russell in a much later round than he normally goes. He is deceptively the number 5 quarterback when most people think he's like 10, 11, 12. No one thinks of Russell Wilson as the top 5 quarterback, and they haven't for a while. And it's because of the fact that they have been basically a run-first team for the last 2 or 3 years, right? Russell Wilson falls out of everyone's conversation. Everyone's looking for that high prolific pocket passer. Well, that's why I think that Russell Wilson is a good value, and he's dropping. So you'll be able to scoop him up in the later rounds and still end up with a. You're going to get a top 12 quarterback, possibly top 5 quarterback.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing for Wilson is his efficiency, and I think that's why he gets left behind. The years where they were very good, and he was still a very good quarterback without those amazing numbers, people didn't look at how little he threw the ball, and the numbers he put up with how little he threw the ball were amazing. If you average it out to these guys throwing the ball 580 times, in a season, he would have 5,500 yards with 45 touchdowns. But that's just not been the game that they've played. And if those reports are true, and he does throw the ball more, I'm all in on everybody on this team. So let's go down to the running backs here. Chris Carson wound up the number 11 running back, played in 15 games, had a great year, over 1,200 yards rushing, 7 touchdowns. He helped out in the passing game. Nothing big, though. 37 receptions, 260 yards, 2 touchdowns. That number has to go up for him to improve on this season, right? You can't imagine his rushing numbers will improve much. Do you think he can improve, or is he inevitably going to fall out of the top, running back one conversation?
Well, it's possible that he falls out of the number 1 running back conversation. I mentioned the possible signing of Marshawn Lynch. If that is the case and he's on the team week 1, you're going to see a situation where you still got Rashad Penny, where they're fighting for touches. If Marshawn comes back, he's going to get goal line touches because he's a physical runner. He's in there to put his head down and bowl people over, which he's really good at doing that. Chris Carson is also really good at doing that, but there's just less opportunity, right? And if they want to throw the ball more, that means even less opportunity for Chris Carson. Now, I'm valuing Chris Carson as a top 24 running back, RB2, at the highest RB2, not RB1. Yep. Even without the addition of Marshawn Lynch, I still think his RB2 numbers are going to be what we are going to see this year.
Well, that's what we're looking at in ADP right now. It looks like he's the running back 17 off the board, which I think is extremely accurate, honestly.
Yeah.
And in order to get him, you're paying a very late 3rd round. Maybe you get him in the early 4th round. And I got to tell you, in the 4th round, if he's there, I'm jumping on.
Not in the 3rd, but in the 4th. Absolutely.
Yeah, because that makes him my number 2 running back on an already excellent, well-balanced team with 2 excellent wide receivers.
Or number 3.
My number 3 running back on an RB-heavy team. And we know there's enough receivers in round 5, 6, 7 that are going to put up numbers.
Exactly.
I assume in most of my leagues I'll have 3 running backs by round 3 or round 4 the latest this year. Just how it's shaking up right now. But
yeah, well, personally, when I do my draft, it's generally after round 3. I've got 2 running backs after 3 rounds, no matter what. Yeah. And depending on who's available, whether I go running back or wide receiver with the 4th pick. But yeah, generally I've got a wide receiver and 2 running backs by the time I'm at round 3.
Penny going to be worth a flyer coming back from injury. He might not be ready for week 1. The talent is there, the draft was there, but. Yeah, you got to wait and see, right? Just wait and see most of him. All right, let's move out to the wideouts here. This is where I think these wideouts are criminally underrated kind of at the moment and just being talked about not as top-tier options. Tyler Lockett, number 14 wide receiver. DK Metcalf, the number 32 wide receiver with only 58 receptions, right? He had 900 yards and 7 touchdowns. I'm looking at both of these guys as wide receiver 2s, but with Metcalf having the higher upside as a guy that could be a mid-tier wide receiver 1 to a back-end wide receiver 1, I don't see a pathway for Lockett to really enter that top 10, top 8. So I think Metcalf is more valuable, and we're going to see where the ADP is. Just kind of blanket statement, who scores more points this year, Tyler Lockett or DK Metcalf in a half-point PPR?
That's really tough because I'm more of a Tyler Lockett person than I am a DK Metcalf. Tyler Lockett had 30 more catches last year than DK Metcalf did, plus another 200-plus yards. I do think both of these guys are super talented and a huge threat. they're going to put up a lot of fantasy points on your team. I think that it's a 1A and a 1A situation with both these guys. One's going to play, Lockett's going to play in the slot. Metcalf will play on the outside, and they're both going to get action. I anticipate them to have similar numbers across the board. So you can grab either one of these guys and feel confident that going forward, as a number 2 wide receiver, not a number 1. Yeah. Both of these guys are not number 1s; they're number 2s. Yeah. So going forward, either one will be fine. It was like Antonio Brown and Juju Smith-Schuster, right? Yeah. They're kind of like, obviously Antonio Brown's the 1A, Juju's the 1B, but hey, when you're on that Pittsburgh offense, they're both valuable.
Well, let's check out their ADP then, because they're going pretty close to each other. Tyler Lockett's the wide receiver 22, and DK Metcalf has the wide receiver 26. So actually falling back into that, just barely into that wide receiver 3 range. And in order to get them, Tyler Lockett's going in the, very end of the 4th round, early 5th round, with DK Metcalf going at the very end of the 5th round, early 6th round.
Now that'd be a situation where I would take DK Metcalf and have him as my number 2, possibly my flex wide receiver. Yeah. And he's going to put up potential wide receiver 2 numbers. Yeah, and that's perfect.
And that's the thing with Metcalf. And I actually think he's going to potentially put up wide receiver 1 numbers. I have Metcalf taking a big jump this year. I'm not going to be surprised with 1,200 yards and 10 or more touchdowns this year. And I think that vaults him into that top 8, kind of category. And that's where I'm going to be projecting him. I'm going to have him very high. And I think you're going to see a lot of other people projecting him high, and his ADP will rise. And that'll be the question. If I can get him in the 5th, he'll be on every single team I have.
Absolutely. I completely agree. If I had a choice between Tyler Lockett in the 5th or DK Metcalf in the 6th, I'm taking DK Metcalf.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, honestly, in the 4th, I might be jumping on Metcalf with where I projected. I might just want to get him because I really love him this year. And I'm going to really be targeting him heavily in my draft. So we'll see where the ADP stays. I'm sure I'll be raising some eyebrows in some of my draft rooms, but I'm going to be all over. So who's number 3 here? They added Philip Dorsett from the free agent pool from New England. They still have David Moore there. I don't know that the number 3 receiver in this offense is necessarily playable for fantasy, but you never know. So who do you think is going to be the number 3 here?
I like David Moore, but they also have Philip Dorsett, and he's been a journeyman player. He could come in and get you if you play the matchups. Now, obviously, I'm not drafting any of these players at all unless someone gets hurt. But yeah, David Moore and Philip Dorsett are the number 3 and number 4 guys, in my opinion, that are going to be on the depth chart. I mean, they have 10 wide receivers on the roster, 11. So. Yeah.
And yeah, I think the answer, as you mentioned, the answer there is I'm not drafting any of them. If it's not,
that's it. Yeah.
I think it's doesn't matter, right? So let's go to tight end here, where unfortunately it's been a fruitful position for Seattle, no matter who's been in, right? We've seen Nick Vannett have some good games. We saw Will Dissly have a really nice run to start the season. Then we saw Jacob Hollister play pretty solidly to end the season. And then they go and get Greg Olsen, who himself was the number 13 tight end in only 10 games played last year. You know what I mean? Which is crazy to think about. He seemed like an afterthought. And then, if you put out his numbers into 16 games, he would have been like the number 6 or 7 tight end. So is it just a situation where there's too many cooks in the kitchen to draft any of these guys? Or will one of them be drafted?
I agree. There's too many cooks in the kitchen. This is a situation where I'm going to be streaming these guys, playing the matchups. I'm not drafting any of these tight ends unless, of course, they're all gone, right? Everybody, we got a tight end run. Oh, Will Disley's there in round 10. Sure. I guess I can't – we're going to see where they are on the depth chart come week 1, and that will determine which tight end I would take over. But right now, like you said, the tight end position was somewhat productive for Seattle, but it's just a question mark.
Yeah, if Olsen comes in, healthy, I just think they're going to play a lot of those two tight end sets, like you said. A team that wants to run the ball, they have offensive line troubles, so that formation could help them protect Wilson a little bit more. And I just see there being productivity from the position, but Yeah, no one that you can draft just because of the question mark there. I'm really upset about that, honestly. This is one of my least favorite signings of the offseason. I freaking loved Disley going into this season
Yeah.
with the start that he had last year, and now that's just blown up. I mean, that happens all offseason, to a lot of teams. But I was definitely targeting Disley as that late round, 10th round, tight end that I wanted, and now I have no interest. He's off my board. I'm swiping left on Will. Our romance has ended.
I agree.
All right, so let's move on to the Rams here. We're going to go away now. The Rams, interesting themselves because for a team that supposedly was really bad last year, if you listen to a lot of I don't know, it just sounded like people thought they were worse than they actually were. They were 9-7, so that's disappointing. Their offense wasn't great to start the year, but finished off pretty well. 11th in points, 4th in the passing attack, but they definitely suffered in the rushing game. 26th, rushing attack. So that's something we'll look at. But we know that the McVay offense is a pass first, run second offense. They brought in a new offensive coordinator, which I thought was interesting, Kevin O'Connell. I don't know too much about him, but they brought in a lot of new coaches. They got a new defensive coordinator, a new special teams, coordinator. So they're trying to make a lot of changes. They're giving McVay the reins, but making a lot of changes to try to make this team better. I don't know if they will be better, but for fantasy, there's going to be some pieces that we need to play here. So Jared Goff was number 13 last year. A lot of yards, but not a lot of points in fantasy. So are you the believer that, the yards are going to turn into more touchdowns this year? Or do you think he's set for a regression and to move back out of that QB1 conversation?
I think he has a chance to move back up into the QB1 conversation. I want to go back to the 2018 season when they were the top offense in football. And then they played the New England Patriots and only managed 3 points in the Super Bowl. Well, Belichick had 2 full weeks to diagnose the offense that Sean McVay runs and was able to pretty much shut it down for virtually the whole game. Teams have taken that tape and learn what Belichick learned and apply that to last year's season, which is one of the reasons why the Rams got off to such a slow, poor start. So rumor has it that Sean McVay in the middle of the season had to completely go back to the drawing board with his offense. Had to completely come up with a new scheme because everyone had figured it out. They transitioned. They went from they were running 3 wide receiver sets. And in the middle of the year, they started running more 2x2, 2 tight end, 2 wide receiver sets, which allowed them to give them more options in both running and passing. They could run out of that formation or pass out of that formation with the same efficiency. When you have Everett and you had Higbee at tight end, they were able to produce. And you had Cooks on the outside, speedy burner with Woods, and then Cooper Kupp in the slot, or vice versa. Both fantastic receivers. So what you're going to see is a bounce back from the Rams offensively. Now that he realized that, and people figured out his scheme, that he needs to do something different. That's why you see the new offense that he's running this year. And when you lose Cooks, the scheme that he's going to run, it's not going to play. They're going to go to more possession type of players. They're not going to sit there and run and gun. The run and gun offense is not what they're for. It's more of a West Coast style where you dink and dunk and you hit your possession receivers in the middle of the field, and that's why you have the tight end position. Why the tight end position has become more valuable for the Rams.
Yeah, I mean, 2 years ago, there wasn't a tight end you could sniff in LA. You know what I mean? You didn't want to look at him. So yeah, that's right. Yeah. So if you're in that camp that you think Goff can succeed this year in that offense and take a step forward, you can draft him. You can get him cheap. So if you like him, he'll be there, right? Late in the draft, I don't think he's going to be drafted as a top 12 quarterback. I'd be surprised. So if you like him, he'll be there.
What I see is I see the yards staying about the same. His touchdowns going up and the interceptions going down.
Yep. Yeah, and he was number 13. So if that happens, you're looking at top 10 for sure.
Yes. Because the opportunities are going to be there. He did take a pay cut, which shows that he's willing to work with the team. They obviously overpaid him.
Yep.
But he did take a pay cut. He restructured his contract, I should say. And
Yeah.
so I think that you're going to see him put up 4,500 yards with 28 to 30 touchdowns and 10 to 15 picks.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think him and McVay, I think they'd all be very happy with that if that's how it looks at the end of the year. They did make some interesting moves in the offseason, as we mentioned, regarding their skill players. So gone are Todd Gurley and Brandon Cooks, a very big part of this team for the last couple of seasons, in our rookies. So in the second round, they drafted both Cam Akers, the running back out of FSU, very highly touted and very highly thought of, and then Van Jefferson, the wide receiver, also out of Florida, but from UF, also in the second round, and considered to be probably a top 7-8 prospect in this draft class for wide receivers. The question is where they'll fit in. So we look at the running back position for the Rams, which has been great over the last few years. Even Gurley, who had a lot of people think of offseason last year, was the number 14 running back. He scored 12 touchdowns on the ground. So there's a lot of points to be had in the backfield here. The question is who scores them, and does anyone score enough of them to be valuable? So you have Darrell Henderson, who I think they got out of the third round from Memphis a year ago, and he had some astronomical, like 9 yards per carry in college, something like that, and didn't get a lot of carries last year. A lot of people thought he could challenge Gurley with the knee troubles, and all the talk going into the offseason last year was that Henderson could even wind up the starter by mid-year, and a lot of people drafted him with high hopes, and he got 39 carries on the season. So didn't really get a lot of work. Malcolm Brown got more work than he did, almost double the carries, which weren't that many, but he's still in the game. And then you have the draft capital for Cam Akers. So right now, most people are drafting Cam Akers as their number one running back. Do you think Darrell Henderson is still in the conversation to be their number one running back, or is it Cam Akers' job?
I think he's in the conversation, but he has about a 10% chance of winning that job. I think Cam Akers is going to get more. They're going to give him the default first round touches. When in first preseason game, he's going to go out there with the ones, and Darrell Henderson will come back with the twos. Now, Cam Akers is a fantastic talent. The guy's speedy, elusive. He's not that Todd Gurley type of running back. So, a bruiser, right? So
it's just a great mix of skills, man. It's running backs deteriorate so fast, but
the guy's only. He's only 5'11", 210 pounds, which is not small for running back, but when you've got some like running backs 6'3", 245 pounds, those are the bruising type of running backs. I think that you're going to see a situation. It's a running back by committee with both Akers, Henderson, and of course Malcolm Brown's going back in there as well. They're not going to let him go. He's been too valuable for them whenever players got hurt.
So let's look at their ADP right now, because as I said, Cam Akers is rising steadily. Right now he's the running back 28, which will go up, I think, through the preseason. And overall, that's the 67 pick off the board, so somewhere in the middle of the sixth round. To me, that's a little bit high right now for the question mark, unless the preseason looks like he's the clear-cut number one, in which case I think he should move up from that place. But until then, I'd rather have Darrell Henderson, who you can get much later than that. He's the running back, I think 43 or so off the board, and you can get him in the 8th, 9th round. That's a much more attractive risk I'd like to take than Akers in the 6th.
Absolutely. I'm not taking Akers in the 6th. He's an unproven commodity. I'd rather wait till later to take Henderson or Brown, like you said. You're going to get better value with more of a potential upside. So the value at the 6th round is just not there. Even if they come out week 1 and say Cam Akers has won the job, I'm still, it's not like he's going to be Edwards-Helaire, right?
Yep. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the ceiling is still going to be kind of limited. You can't assume he's going to have a Todd Gurley-like ceiling because he's not Todd Gurley, And if you're drafting Cam Akers where he's going right now, that means you're drafting him over Darius Geis, Kareem Hunt, some guys that I certainly, Keyshawn Vaughn, who I think has a clearer path to work than Cam Akers does. So I'd probably be more likely to draft those guys in that round. So we'll see. It'll be interesting, though. There's a lot of points there. Also, a lot of points for the receivers. Cooper Kupp was the number 4 receiver last year on the back of a few monstrous games, but that's not to downplay the rest of the season because he played great all year. Robert Woods, had some up and down sections of the season, wound up as the number 17 wide receiver, right in the middle of wide receiver 2 category, and hard to be upset with that. The touchdowns aren't there for Woods, but they usually aren't. So the big question is Brandon Cook, 72 vacated targets. You draft Van Jefferson, also in the second round out of Florida. You still have Josh Reynolds, who had 43 targets last year. Who's set to take on a lot of these 72 targets? Will they just be equally split among everybody that's there, or is someone in line to kind of step up here with a lot of those targets?
I think you're going to see a lot of those targets go to the tight end, the 2-by-2 formation that they've been running half of last year and they're going to run this year. When you saw Brandon Cooks get those targets, he was on the outside burning wide. He's the burner, as they call him, right? The speed demon. He's going down and running behind the defense. I don't think they're going to run they're running a run and shoot offense this year. They're running more of a possession style offense where they're dinking and dunking and throwing to the tight ends. I still think if you're looking at Robert Woods and Cooper Kupp, they're both 1As. They're equal. You would have no problems drafting either one. They both had 1,100 yards last year. The only difference between the two is Robert Woods only had 2 touchdowns and Cooper Kupp had 10 touchdowns. So they both had 90 catches. I don't see those numbers changing.
And I look at the ADP, and for me with Cooper Kupp, I'm just kind of astonished. He's the wide receiver 14 off the board right now, and you can get him at the very end of the 3rd round. And if you give me 2 top tier running backs, and then Cooper Kupp is my first wide receiver, I'm pretty freaking happy about that.
So if you took 2 running backs with round 1 and 2, and ended up with Cooper Kupp and Tyler Lockett in 3 and 4,
I'm thrilled with that to start. That's a great start. I don't know why he's going that late, honestly. I think he needs to be talked about in that, with the second round guys, honestly. But, Woods, I think is right with Woods just because, again, I think the touchdowns, I just think his ceiling is lower than Cooper Kupp's is. So I'm happy with where Woods is being, kind of drafted right now because I think you can get value there. That's near the end of the 4th round. And I'd be fine with him as my number 2 receiver. But if it's a choice between Cooper Kupp as my number 1, and Woods as my number 2, I'd rather have Kupp as my 1, I think.
I agree. But don't be disappointed if Kupp is gone and you end up with Woods. I still think that you have the potential to get just as many fantasy points. This is going to be one of those productive offenses that, this is a team that I want players from because they're going to score a lot of fantasy points.
Yeah. So, all right, let's break down tight end quickly here. So, Gerald Everett had a nice little pop in the middle of the season, scored a lot of points in, about a 4 or 5 week span. And then you saw Tyler Higbee come up and go even more ham than Everett did. Higbee's last 5 weeks or so were, epic. 3 or 400 plus yard reception games, multiple 10 plus target games mixed in there as well. So the bigger question is Tyler Higbee, is it real or is it hype? Is he going to be a top 6, tier 2 tight end, or is that bound to fall back here? I feel like if you're saying that, tight end is going to benefit the most, then there's no reason to think he can't be a top flight tight end.
I absolutely do think he can be an absolute top flight tight end. The targets are going to be there. As I mentioned before, they transitioned to a 2-by-2 formation last year, running less of the 3 wide receiver sets. That Tyler Higbee was the recipient of all those increased targets because remember he played in the second half of the season and was extremely productive. And they were constantly. They always ran. They had many tight ends, not many tight ends. Hold on one second here. Between Higbee and Everett, They still had Kendall Blanton. He managed to be productive as well. If I can pull that up real quick here with his numbers. Let's see, what did he have?
While I wait for it there, I just want to bring up their ADP because when I look at Higbee, who's going in the seventh round or so as the tight end 8 off the board, he's going just after Evan Ingram. Well, I'd much rather have Tyler Higbee than Evan Ingram going into the season. And he's going just ahead of, as tight end 9, we have Austin Hooper, who I'm also off of this year. So in that range, for me, it's a clear cut, Higbee as the best guy that's being drafted in that, tight end, the back end of the tight end ones.
I agree.
Well, no part of Evan Ingram. I'm not getting Evan Ingram again. not doing it. All right, so I'm going to have Tyler Higbee as more than likely a top 6 tight end into my projections, and for me, if I can get him in the 7th or 8th round, I'm going to take him.
And where's he going?
In about the 7th round, mid-7th round, which is a little higher than I typically pay for tight end. I just usually don't draft there until I see the high upside, which is why I got Evan Ingram a couple of times, because the upside conversation was that. If you're not paying too much for him, you could possibly be getting the 2nd or 3rd best tight end. But I'm not doing that 3 years in a row. So I'm going to move off to Higbee, and hopefully he's on a couple of my rosters this year. All right, last team in the division, which is funny, and this is why I love this division. This is the last team we're talking about, and I think is one of the most exciting teams in both just NFL terms and fantasy football terms. So the Arizona Cardinals, 5-10-1 last year with their rookie quarterback Kyler Murray. Wound up tied for 16th in points scored. Very respectable. 24th in the passing game, 10th in the rushing game, and a lot of movement here as far as faces in new places. Gone is the underperforming and overpaid David Johnson. And welcome in one of the top wide receivers in the game, DeAndre Hopkins. So a win-win for them. They needed to get that contract off their books badly. And they needed firepower for Kyler Murray. So I love all these moves for them. Didn't do much in the draft. They added a highly rated offensive tackle in the 3rd round. Hopefully that helps them out. But let's talk about Kyler Murray. He's going as the number 4 quarterback right now. He was number 7 last year and showed a ton of talent. I mean, there were games and there were plays that he made that show you exactly why he was the number 1 pick. And why people are that high on him this year. You have the rushing baseline, which always helps, we know. So is he a top 5 quarterback for you?
He is not a top 5 quarterback for me. He's more like a number 7, number 8 quarterback. There's some other players that I would take over him. But that's not to say that he can't finish that way. It's just, I think that he's going to have what is known as a sophomore slump, and he's going to have a lot of teams that are going to catch up to him. Now you add these weapons, you add the D-Hop to the team. That's going to obviously help both Larry Fitzgerald and Christian Kirk as well as Kyler Murray. I mean, they're going to take coverage away from those guys. I think there's a potential for Kyler Murray to increase his numbers, but being a 2nd-year player, still new to the NFL, I don't see him as definitely as a top 5 quarterback. I could probably pick a couple of different players before him.
Yeah. And I know it's dangerous to compare players with different skill sets, but a little danger has to be there with Baker Mayfield and how high he was drafted last year after a good rookie season, and then got all that hype in the offseason, drafted really high, and obviously way underperformed. He also had a lot of firepower. They brought in big name receivers, there's some similarities there. So I'm a little worried about it. I do think just how they want to play with their offense and their coach, I think is a big difference. Baker got saddled with, whoever he got saddled with last year. I can't remember the coach's name now. That was, gone after becoming, from being the quarterback coach or whoever he was to being head coach and then gone. But I think Murray's just in a better situation overall, not being in Cleveland. And I do think he's a top 5 quarterback at the end of the year with the rushing baseline. I'm going to have him projected that way. Let's talk about Kenyon Drake, one of the more polarizing guys of the offseason, because he performed amazing with Arizona. Number 3 in points per game after he got there, after week 9. And that's obviously a huge number, to be in the top 3, points per game is, saying a lot. Now, when he was in Miami, the first half of the season, he was not anywhere near as good. 3.7 yards per carry in Miami, 5.2 yards per carry in Arizona, no touchdowns in Miami, 8 touchdowns on the ground in Arizona. So, obviously a big difference here. It's the same man. I mean, Kenyon Drake didn't change. Nothing changed in Kenyon Drake in 2 weeks. So, is it just about the offense in Arizona and the fit in the system? I know I'm a lot higher on Kenyon Drake than you are, so let me let you talk about what you think about Kenyon Drake's going to do this year.
Yeah, as you said, I'm really not high on Kenyon Drake. He spent 4 years in Miami. Was below average at best. He had been given almost every opportunity. Now, that's not to say that he didn't perform well because he was terrible. It could have been he was terrible, or the offensive line, or any number of reasons. I just don't see this being an offense that's going to focus specifically on Kenyon Drake being a primary weapon. You're going to see a lot more Chase Edwards in as a pass catching back than you will see Kenyon Drake. He's going to be more of the goal line or first down, second down running back, right? But the offense is going to be a pass heavy offense. You're going to have Kyler Murray is going to drop back and throw, and when he doesn't throw, he's going to run. Yeah. Like you said, 500 yards rushing last year. He's probably going to get something similar to that if he doesn't get hurt. I'm of the opinion he's going to get hurt, so we'll see. But yeah, Kenyon Drake to me is not on my radar. If I drafted him in the 5th round, maybe the 6th round, that'd be the earliest I'd take Kenyon Drake.
Wow. I mean, so when I've been looking at mock drafts, right, it's been all over the board, as they're always going to be this early, in the offseason. Yeah. I saw him going in the 1st round in a few mock, and not only 1 or 2, and not like, small, small websites, you know what I mean, like, Barn and Country, fantasy football league. I mean, I'm talking about, major, websites and, places having him going that high. I do think 1st round's a little aggressive. But if he's my number 1 running back, I get him in the 2nd round, or he's my number 2 running back, in the 2nd round, I am feeling like I am ahead of the curve.
So I really take D-Hop in the 2nd round over Kenyon Drake if I've gotten a running back already.
Yeah, but D-Hop's going in the 1st round in basically every mock draft I'm seeing.
Is he?
Yeah, he's still. That's what I'm saying.
Really?
Well, we're gonna get there in a second with the wide receivers. And see where that goes. I'm trying to find this draft. Here we go. ESPN 12-team. PPR mock draft. Now, this was done on May 8th, so just a handful of days ago. And let's see here. Kenyon Drake with the 3rd pick in the 2nd round, the 15th pick. So, I mean, I'm just saying, it's going to be a wild swing. There's going to be people that feel like he's a 4th, 5th rounder like you do. And some people think he's a first, back into the 1st rounder. And you don't see a lot of guys that have that spread for their draft, for their ADP, right? Very few guys have a 3+ round spread between where people think they can go. So it's interesting. We'll see where he goes. Let's talk about those receivers. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. No, go ahead.
Yeah, so we'll talk about the receivers here. Obviously, D-Hop came in. That's the big story. They already had a very solid, wide receiver foundation with Christian Kirk and Larry Fitzgerald. Already had some young talent there. They have Andy Isabella, Keyshawn Johnson, Hakeem Butler. All these guys are going to struggle to see the field now with D-Hop coming in. Obviously, it's Hopkins 1, Kirk 2, Fitzgerald 3, I think. And the question becomes, can DeAndre Hopkins hold his wide receiver, 2, 3, or 4 value moving into this offense? So he had 150 targets in Houston last year. You had Kirk with 107 targets, Fitzgerald with 109, obviously both for Arizona. So how many targets do you think realistically DeAndre Hopkins will have this year?
He won't have 150. There are too many mouths to feed in Arizona. I believe you mentioned it, around 120 targets. How many receptions did he have?
104 out of those 104.
Yeah, I definitely see that coming down to the 90, 85 range. There's going to be a more balanced offense. It's not going to be, bombs away to D Hop like it was in Houston. It was bombs away to hit with D Hop, Will Fuller,
Yeah.
all those guys. This is going to be more of a possession type of offense.
Yeah, I agree with you. And that's why I'm down on Hopkins, and it's nothing. It sounds bad. I'm not down on DeAndre Hopkins. I love DeAndre Hopkins. He's going to make this team better. A big part of the reason why this becomes one of the best, if not the best, divisions in football, because this is possibly the worst team in this division, and I really want to watch this team a lot. So it's very exciting to me. I just think that the volume won't be there, like you said. I mentioned 120 targets, so I think 85 receptions is a good number for him, and he still might have the 7 touchdowns, and that's fine. And I still think he's a wide receiver 1. I just think those numbers put you in that wide receiver 8 to 10 category as opposed to a top one. And as I look at his ADP, he's still considered the wide receiver 3. Going off the reported number
first round. Cannot do it.
So right now he's right behind Michael Thomas and Devontae Adams, ahead of Julio Jones and Tyreek Hill and Chris Godwin. Yeah, I can't put him ahead of those 3 guys. Hill, Jones, and Godwin for sure.
Okay, this is another thing. He's coming into a brand new team with not a brand new quarterback, but a brand new quarterback for him. How are you going to put him ahead of Julio Jones, who's been with Matt Ryan for years? Like this is why to me he's much lower, is because there's such a question mark on what his role is going to be, what their offense is going to look like. We have no idea. They have no chemistry together. They've never played together, and they're not working out in the off season together because the coof. So that's too high.
I really think it's subtraction by addition. You know what I mean? They add D Hop, and that just I think that evens out everyone's ceiling. Plateaus everyone's ceiling that much more, while making the team better. So when I look
but see, you could see Larry Fitzgerald and Christian Kirk. You'll see their numbers, I think, increase because as teams target D Hop as the main weapon, he's going to see more double and triple coverage, opening up Larry Fitzgerald and Christian Kirk.
Well, the attempts would have to go way up because they have almost, very few vacated targets. I mean, all right, Damiere Byrd had 46 targets and Pharaoh Cooper had 33. So there are almost 80 vacated wide receiver targets from last year. So there are some to work with. I just think assuming that Kirk or Fitzgerald can move up from 110 targets is kind of rough. I think Fitzgerald would go under 100 targets, around 90. And I see Kirk being around the same, 110 to 115, with Hopkins in the 120 kind of range. And I think that makes them all draftable and playable. I think Christian Kirk will be a maybe approaching back-end wide receiver 2, but more than likely a top-tier wide receiver 3 guy, with Fitzgerald being on the very back end of the wide receiver 3, kind of early flex tier. But I think they're all going to be playable and draftable. The big question for me is just, can Hopkins maintain that top tier, or does he have to fall into that,
He's gonna fall into the tier. He's below Julio Jones to me.
Yeah. And even in half-point PPR, I think he's below Tyreek Hill, just because of the touchdown capability of Hill and, the offense he's on. So we're going to skip tight end here, and we're just going to bring up their names, Max Williams and Dan Arnold, and we'll leave it at that because that's why we're skipping it. They're not going to be in play this year, and the tight end position won't be in play, I don't think, for Arizona. Yeah.
No, I don't think so either. They run the 3 wide receiver sets.
Fair enough, man. Fair enough. All right. Well, that's the last team for the NFC West. That's going to do it for us today. Really appreciate your time, Jeff. Thanks again for coming back on the show and helping us out. Hopefully we get to have you back soon for another fun episode. Got a couple of fun things coming up soon. Hopefully we have a mock draft in the works and some other stuff for the off season. So hopefully we get you back on, and we hope you have a good rest of your day, man.
Well, thank you very much for having me. It was a pleasure, and you have a great day.
All right. Thanks, Jeff. We'll talk to you soon, man. All right, everybody. That's going to do it for us today. Thanks again to Jeff Hussain for joining us for the NFC West preview. Catch us here soon. We're going to be getting on with the rest of the divisions in the NFC. Make sure you have all of your research done for these early drafts. We've got drafts starting for people early in the summer, depending on if it's dynasty drafts, different formats. Some people just like to draft early, and you got to do your research now instead of spending all the hours doing the research. you couldn't just watch the GOAT Fantasy Football Podcast, you can hit me up on Twitter at GOATFF Podcast, or you can tweet me personally. It's at Jim Neander. Either one, you may or may not be replied to. It's not really my thing, but I am trying, just to be honest. But shoot me a line there. You can also find us on YouTube and find the videos. The GOAT Fantasy Football Podcast channel. We appreciate it if you share the videos, like them, and subscribe to the channel. That would be awesome. We hope you have a great rest of your day, and we will talk to you soon. All right.